up the chat room. I'm contemplating whether or not to let my dogs in.
Let your dogs in so they can feel like a part of it.
I'm gonna let my dogs in. They're such pains in the ass. So sorry, people.
And now we can. Ooh, we are live. People are coming in. This is going to be a great night. Red at the Bone. Jacqueline Woodson. This is what we're talking about. Ooh, I need a manicure, but I'm so excited. This book is truly incredible. I read it in a day and a half. Jacqueline is getting her doggies together. Hi, Jacqueline.
Hey, Phoebe.
Before we get into all of this, I just want to like set you up. I want to introduce myself. I'm Phoebe Robinson. I'm an actor, producer, writer, workaholic. I think is the true sort of definition of me. And anytime I have a chance to talk about books with an author, I geek out. And so when I got the opportunity to do it in conversation with Miss Jacqueline Woodson, best-selling author, iconic author, fellow Ohioan. I'm from Cleveland. You're from Columbus?
Yes.
Yes. I could not resist. So we're talking about Red at the Bone tonight. And before we get into the book, because it's so phenomenal, Jacqueline wanted to read an excerpt. So I'm going to turn it over to you so we can, what page should we all turn to?
We should turn to chapter 15, which is page 147. Okay. So, and thanks so much, Phoebe, for talking.
Perfect.
I admire you greatly. And I was, before people started coming in, I was talking about how much I love Phoebe's podcast. I mean, I love, don't touch my head. I love so much that you do. And thanks for keeping me laughing through this period in time.
And thank you so much.
The winter slip rocks red Mercedes cruised up Cornelia Street, made a left turn on Knickerbocker Avenue and faded into memory. Aubrey was 15 years old. It was the first time he had seen a car like that in the real world. As he walked from his apartment with Iris's words still pressing against his brain, "You put a baby inside me." He squinted at the pretty light-skinned brother he had always kind of known, now making good with his fly clothes and sweet ride. Slip Rock stuffed an unlit blunt into his mouth, then lifted his hand to his Kango and nodded at Aubrey. His hazel eyes slitted against the winter sun. "What up, shorty?" "What up, Slip Rock?" 10 years later, Aubrey stood holding Melody's hand and listening to an OG whose name he couldn't remember recount the story of Slip Rock's murder. "You know, they shot him in the back of the head like they do when they real mad. That's how they killed that yellow boy." The old man's bottom dentures were loose in his mouth, moving in small circles as he spoke. Melody stared, her own mouth hanging open, wide-eyed. The OG blinked down at her, then lowered his voice as he recounted the way the back of Slip's head was left dripping from the baby swings in Knickerbocker Park. His dookie chain snatched, his eyes blinked open forever. "That's all she wrote," the man said, folding his bottom lip in to steady his teeth. Standing there, Aubrey remembered Slip Rock's nod, the cheek still rocking baby fat and hardly anything on his face to shave yet. As the OG glanced at Melody again and took a sip from the bottle hidden inside a brown bag, Melody's eyes followed his hand, the bottle moving to his lips, the wince that followed the sip. "That your girl? Pretty little thing. Gotta make a butt ugly boy, but I ain't never seen her make a ugly girl child. Now when they grown, that's a different story." The man laughed softly, then took another drink and got quiet. "Forever, son," he repeated, as though he suddenly realized how poetic it sounded. That boy's eyes was blinked open forever. Aubrey held tighter to Melody's hand, remembering how at 15, he'd watched Slip drive by, wishing he could get in the game, make some fast money, take himself and Iris and the baby that was coming away from this place. Slip Rock had been spanking a royal blue Adidas suit and blue Kango matching it. He was about 2 years behind the fashion times, but it made sense since he'd done a stint at Spofford, where, as everyone knew, time stopped. The speakers were blasting De La Soul, and that was enough to bring all the kids on the block running toward the car. Mirror, mirror on the wall, tell me, mirror, what is wrong? Let's stop there.
You guys, this book, I just want to hold it. It is so good. There is so much I want to talk to you about before we get to audience questions. One of the things that really struck me about this book, you know, outside of the phenomenal writing and the impactful storytelling, is sort of this sense that I think is very much a human experience, that when you're young, you think the trauma or the intense situations that you go through, you don't really understand it, that has also happened to your parents or that has happened to your grandparents. And so the characters throughout the book, as they get older, I feel like they get that sort of, I don't want to call it wisdom, but there seems to be a little bit more of an understanding and a compassion, and them being able to see the people that they sort of were kind of like, oh, you don't get me. They could see their complexities. And so I'm wondering how you were able to capture such a nuanced facet of being a person on this planet.
Oh man, thank you for that question, which is not an easy one. I think one thing is I write for young people, so I've never kind of forgotten that space of what it means to be young and to be unseen and to be misunderstood and to be unheard. And then now I'm a mom, right? So I feel like I live the world, I live in both worlds all the time. That world of watching my children see me as corny, see me as someone who doesn't get it, see me as someone who's, you know, even, you know, I'm sure my daughter has called me anti-feminist, you know, like all of these things that I embraced all my life, like to suddenly be seen as other in this way, and realizing that this is how the divides begin to happen. They never lived the life that you lived when you were living it. And so they can't even imagine it. They can't imagine you being young. They can't imagine you having sex for the first time. They can't imagine you, you know, standing on the corner with a spliff, or like, I don't know, the many things you did when you were young, and they don't want to hear it. But at the same time, I always think of that Sandra Cisneros vignette about being 11. And when you're 11, you're also, you know, 10 and 9 and 8, and how, as adults, we do hold all of those years inside of us. And for some of us, where it hasn't been too traumatic, or where we've embraced the trauma, we remember them. And so as a writer, going back to that space of being able to see Aubrey at 15 and to see Melody at 15, even though they're two very different people living in two very different times, and also to see the way history repeats itself inside the next generation.
I mean, and I don't want to, I'm going to try like not talk too much about the book where I spoil it, because there's so much that happens. And one of the things that really sort of resonated with me is none of the Black women here they're not perfect. They're messy. They're complicated. They, you know, care how the world views them. They care about pursuing their dreams, maybe more so than motherhood. And sort of that's something you don't see a lot in the culture. It's something you don't see enough in, you know, in publishing and film, TV. And for me, I thought you really captured all the different ways you can be a woman, all the different experiences you can have as a woman. And I'm curious as to how important that was for you in telling this story.
It was really important. I remember I wrote a book many years in the early 90s called I Hadn't Meant to Tell You This. And it was the story of two girls who were being raised by their father. One girl was Black and wealthy. Another girl was white and poor. And they become friends. The white girl's mom has died of breast cancer. Poor healthcare for poor people, right? You know, all the reasons that people end up dying when they don't have money to help keep them alive. The Black girl's mom inherits money and takes off. She's like, I'm done with this. I'm not happy. And everything I write, I show to Toshi Regan, who's one of my besties. And I was like, and when she read I Hadn't Meant to Tell You, that she was like, thank God you made that crazy mama leave and not stay and make her daughter crazy. Where everyone else was, how could the mother leave? How, what kind of woman is that would get up and leave her family? And Toshi was like, she did the right thing. She saved her child's life, basically. And I think that has always stayed with me in terms of choices that we make and choices that get celebrated and the ones that don't, right? So when I was thinking about Iris, this child gets pregnant at 15. And I think I was thinking of all the ways we change our mind between the time we're 15 and 50, right? And so here is a girl at 15, 16 who's like, I want to keep this baby. But then she's like, oh, hell no. Like, wait, this is forever. And so, that frontal lobe not being connected and this child like growing into a woman and making different choices. And then someone like Sadie who, tried and tried and tried to have a baby and then, loses a baby and then has this child and brings to this child her backstory, which is the other thing that parents do, right? It's like, if I can't be this, you're going to be this. And which is just as traumatizing for children, for someone who's trying to create their own legacy in the world. And really just thinking about all the roads that we take as mothers and that we take as aunties, that we take as daughters, that we take as sisters, and really trying to bring that complexity to the character without trying to create some kind of magical Negro thing. Like it doesn't exist, right? Black exceptionalism doesn't exist. The magical Negro doesn't exist. Like we're all complicated and brilliant and messy. And I really wanted the characters to portray all of that.
Yeah, and their relationships to each other are all, sort of really complicated. I'm thinking right now of Iris and Aubrey and sort of how like she loves him, but she doesn't see forever with him, which I think is just such a sort of like, when you read that, you're like, oh, but you're also like, that's real life. Like, not everyone is meant to be your soulmate that you date. And some people are just meant to be in your life for a shorter amount of time or a longer amount of time. And obviously, with Melody, they're connected forever. But, it was really sort of one of those things where you felt the pain for him, but you also felt the pain for her. And you didn't choose sides. You just were like, this is what this situation is. And they're trying to do their best with it. And so how is it as a writer sort of writing these characters who you're just like, they're just going to be messy. They're just going to be complicated and it's not going to be easily resolved.
One thing that happens when you write for young people is in good books, there's not a pat ending, right? And fairy tales have these pat endings. Realistic fiction doesn't. And kids, when they come to books, that's not the expectation, right? They want to be challenged in some way. They want to be made to think. They want a book to resonate. And so I think I learned a lot in writing for young people about how to write for adults. Is the same thing. Like I'm not going to write cliche where there's this happily ever after. And by the end of the book, like a sitcom, everything just gets braided up neatly. I really, and of course, as a writer too, right? That you do want to challenge yourself in the writing. You don't want to get bored. You don't want to feel like you're corny. You don't want to feel like you're lying. And I think if I had made them less messy and less beautiful in their messiness, I would have been lying to myself and I would have been bored and I would have written a janky book. So.
So one of the things that I also really enjoyed about Red at the Bone is sort of the historical moments that are backdrops, where you're talking about the Tulsa Massacre. You mentioned 9/11. There are a lot of these moments that happen in history that help sort of contextualize not only the world that the characters inhabit, but maybe the way that they behave. And so I'm curious as to find out what was sort of your motivation behind having certain moments in history play key background or key backdrops for these characters in the book?
So it's sandwiched between the Tulsa Race Massacre, of which the 100th anniversary is coming up next year, happened in 1921, and 9/11. And one thing first of all, I didn't learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre till I was in my 20s, which I think is a travesty that this is not taught in schools, that we don't have this history. And then when you start delving into it, seeing all the other massacres, right? Looking at Chicago, looking at Florida, all these other places where the destruction of Black wealth happened in this country, and looking at redlining, like all the ways in which this country did as much as it could to keep us at a certain economic level. And then we look at something like 9/11, where when it comes back to you, you don't, what we don't see is the many Black and brown bodies lost, right? There is this kind of whitewashing of 9/11 that disappears people who look like us. And I didn't want that to happen. So I wanted those two things to play a key role in the book, and really making us think about loss and think about the reason behind the loss. I mean, I could have gone into mass incarceration and all of these other ways in which Black and brown communities lose our people, but I really wanted to situate it in these two moments, and not only talk about loss, but talk about survival and the way we keep going on, which, of course, brings me to that ending, which we're not going to reveal. But
so when I'm curious, I always like to ask people, and it's a tough answer, because you're like, I don't know. Like, whenever someone asks me, what do you want people to take away from the book that you just wrote? I'm always like, I don't know, because everyone's life experience is so different. And they bring so much of themselves to a book that transforms it, the meaning of it. But I have to ask you the question, because I really love this book so much, and it just made me think and feel so much. So I'm just curious as to what you wanted all of us who read the book and are reading the book to take away from it.
I'm a good story. I mean, I want you to read a story. I want you to fall in love with characters. I wanted to make you think. I wanted to make you act in some way. I want it to be something that you converse about, or as Slip Rock would have said, conversate about. I really want it to live. And I think what good books do is they live inside of us for a long time, and we pull them up when we need them. Coming from the world of writing for young people, if you try to teach someone something when you're writing, your writing's didactic, right? And then the young people don't read it, and they get mad at you and their teachers and their caregivers for making them try to read it. So I really try to pull back from being didactic in books and really just write because I have all of these questions. And by the end of my experience, as you know, writing a book, I'm different because of that, because of writing it. And my hope is that readers will be different because they read it.
Okay. So now that you brought that up, how are you different having written Red at the Bone?
I think with every book I write, one thing I'm different. In one way in which I'm different is that I believe a little bit more firmly that I can finish a book, that I can start writing a book and then actually finish writing it. I know a lot more about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I feel like I can. I think I was always nervous about writing historical fiction. And to me, the fact that the 90s is historical is really kind of wild, right? Or that I mean, I can understand the 20s being historical, but the 90s, the early 2000s is like, oh my God, I'm so old. But I think with each book I write, I get a little bit more sure of myself as a writer, even though each new book I write, I still have all these doubts and don't believe that I can finish it. But I do. Red at the Bone, I felt like it taught me a lot about minimalism, about how, again, you don't need a whole lot of adjectives to get a story on the page. And it taught me that I could write from multiple perspectives in the same narrative. And that, again, I think what I was trying to push against was a linear narrative. And I think a linear narrative would have been very boring for me, but it took a lot to construct that so that it wasn't a linear narrative, but one that still a reader would want to follow and not give up on because of how it moved through time.
Ooh, that's great. And so before I ask you this next question, I just want to remind everyone that Red at the Bone is the September selection for Barnes and Noble. So get it if you haven't gotten it. And you're talking about sort of like what you want the reader to take away from the work and what you sort of learned from writing this. What are some books that you've really enjoyed reading this year that have really stuck out to you that you've been like, oh, you guys should read this too?
So I've been reading an awful lot of Ida B. Wells because I'm researching for a project. But I actually brought this book with me over here. It's called Vanguard. How Black women broke barriers, won the vote, and insisted on equality for all. And it's by Martha S. Jones. And I was scared of this book because I thought it was going to be super, super heady. And in this COVID pandemic, revolutionary time, I didn't think my brain could hold on to it, but she writes so engagingly. And I just want to get lost in this history. So this is the one that's been on my bedside. The book that's been in my ears, Cast, by Isabel Wilkerson, because I love the warmth of other suns. I'm also rereading Mira Jacobs' Good Talk, which I don't know if you read this, but so good. And
I haven't yet.
Yeah, I'm not going to blow up where you live, but she
lives
close to you. It's so good. And I'm trying to, Caitlin Greenwich is writing a new book that I'm reading the galley of, and already it's blowing my mind. So there's a lot of good stuff coming. There's a lot of good stuff already here. What are you reading? Come on, hit me up with some.
I just finished reading Ijeoma Oluo's upcoming book, Mediocre. And it's about white male sort of domination in society and how that has not been great. And I freaked out over it. It is so good. It comes out in December. Everyone should get it. I love Such a Fun Age. I recently just read Alicia Keys' memoir. I just wanted something really her energy is always just very chill and nice. Yeah. And it is one of those things where I forgot that Alicia Keys became famous at 19.
Wow.
And just has put out so much music, she was on Oprah at 19 or 20 and has just put out so much amazing music, has been such a huge activist. And I just forgot she's done so much, and she's only I think 39 or 40. And I was like, I bow down to you. Wow. And then what else have I read? I forget. I've read so many books this year, but those are the ones that I really, really, really love right now.
Do you read quickly? Are you a fast reader?
It all depends. With this, with your book, I had to slow down because I was loving it so much. And I was like, Phoebe, just savor this. Don't I know you're loving it. Just take it slow. So that's what I did. But then sometimes when there are books that are heady, like you were saying earlier, that can be a slog for me where I'm just oh, I feel like I'm back in school and I should take notes. And then that takes me a while. But if I'm enjoying it, I can rip through it.
That's so cool. Hey, I have to give a shout out to Chaos Theory. Do you drink wine?
I do, of course. Yes.
I'm dropping a bottle of this over to your house. So Chaos Theory is by Brown Vineyard. It's a Black-owned vineyard. They are so badass, and it's a small family vineyard, and they don't sell in liquor stores or anything like that. So you have to. But I love them because they're such good people. And I'm trying to do all kinds of Black-owned stuff every day. But when I come back to Brooklyn, I'm gonna hunt you down and leave a bottle somewhere for you. So
thank you. And you guys keep putting your questions in the chat so I can start. Oh, here we go. Oh my, can we zoom in? No, we can't. Okay, I'm gonna lean in. Cheryl Sandberg. Okay, hold on. Aisha asked, did you base any of the characters off of people you know?
I did not. Maybe someone will come along and say, oh yeah, that's me. But if I did, I wasn't conscious of it. And the thing about it is, when you base characters off of people you know, then they become, they're not as interesting. They become flatter. Like characters are tend to be bigger than human beings so that they could be in the book the way they are in the book. But if you just take, say, your sister or someone and put them in a book, that she's not going to be that interesting to the reader. So maybe they're composites. I mean, like I see a lot of myself in both Aubrey and Iris, but neither one of and Melody, but no one is me, a brother or sister. I feel like definitely all the Bushwick stuff. I grew up in Bushwick, so I know that neighborhood very, very well. So I can put stuff there and know it. Of course, where I live now is in the book. But in terms of the characters, no.
Okay, cool. Next question. My boyfriend, can you zoom in? My boyfriend's in charge of bringing up the questions. Gotta make them work. Okay, so Maya writes, these characters felt so real to me, similar to my family. Love the book. What inspired the title of the book?
Oh, you'll get to that in the book. But thank you. One of the many inspirations for that title is the fact that we all feel that way at some point. Like we've been cut open, or we hope to feel that way at some point. And so that at one point in the book, Iris talks about that. She's at Oberlin and she has this relationship, and she says she feels red at the bone, just basically exposed and raw and bleeding. And so that's where the title comes from. And for all the
Great.
characters, they experience that at some point.
Okay, cool. Gina R writes, I'm enjoying reading the relationship between mothers and daughters that are in your book. Are a lot of these ideas based on your own personal relationship with your mom or kids, from relationships you've observed from family members and or friends? And do you take a lot of ideas for your books from experiences with family or friends, or just current events? I just want to say this font is so small, and the fact that I can read it is wild because I am 36. I didn't know my eyes were still good.
Oh man, you're killing it, because I'm just looking at the splotches on the white screen. So when I was a kid, I've known I wanted to be a writer since I was 7. My family's from South Carolina, came to Brooklyn. And when I would say I was a writer, first the thing they would do is when they knew I was serious about it, as a little kid, like the minute I came into the room and my mother and grandmother were talking, they'd get quiet. And then if I overheard something they said, they would say, I don't want you putting this up and you're writing it. And the thing, well, don't go telling your little friends was one thing, right? But also don't put this in any of that stuff you're writing. And the thing I always wanted to say was the characters living in my head are so much more interesting, y'all are, than real family. And so I don't mind, MINE, like the people I know, for characters and expressions and stuff. I just, and again, if I'm doing it, I'm not conscious of it. I like in my new book for young people, I have a character who plays the guitar, and I showed it to my friend Toshi Regan, who plays guitar, because I wanted her to give me feedback. Am I portraying this character right? Does he play the guitar the way Toshi plays it? I don't know if I pay attention to how she plays it. I just know how beautifully she plays it. But I don't really know, like, if they end up in my books. But if they do, again, I'm not conscious of it. And I don't sit and listen to kids talking. I don't, try to rewrite the way someone's walking or any of that. That's not how it works. It's more organic than that.
Yeah. So this is a question from me, and then I'll get back to the Q&A from the viewers. So, what do you love most about writing for young adults? And then, like, what do you love the most about writing for adults?
For young adults, I love the discovery, right? I love that I can go into a world of being 12, 13, 14, 15, and remember so much about my own childhood, but also figure out stuff that I didn't figure out as a kid, but now I can figure it out on the page. And I think the thing about writing for young adults, if you were this, I was not a super powerful kid, but I'm a powerful adult that can go back into that world of being a young person and feel powerful inside of it. And by extension, my reader feels powerful, right? So you can kind of change the narrative of your childhood in this way. And I love that. I love being able to, Madeline L'Engle said, when you write, you should write remembering the child you were, because the essence of childhood doesn't change. And I truly believe that. And I love that. I think some people, it was so traumatic that they just forgot so much about their childhood. And for me, that wasn't the case. I held on to a lot of it. And writing for adults, it's interesting. I love that I could curse and have so much sex in there, like there, you know, because I don't have curses in my books for young people. I don't have sex in those books much. I don't think I have it at all. I just have never gotten broken through to be able to write that. And there are young adult books that do have sex scenes, that do have cursing, and that are fabulous. Like, I'm not judging any of that. I think there's room in this world for all kinds of young people's literature, and I celebrate that. And I know that for me as a writer, I write a different kind of book for young people than I do for adults, in talking about the sex and the cursing and stuff. So it's nice to kind of, you know, let my freak flag fly in that way when I get to writing adult fiction.
Cool. That's awesome. Okay. So Celeste writes, has becoming a mother changed the way you choose a character's language? That's a cool question.
Has it? I don't think so. When I was before, I call it, you know, BC, before children, and AC, after children. So BC, I was always thinking about young people when I was writing, and I was writing for them. I think one thing that changed, it didn't change I think it changed the physical way I wrote, right? I had to be on more of a schedule. I could write during the day, but in the afternoon, I had to come back into the world and be mommy, whereas before I was being Jacqueline Woodson. So there is a way in which a presence of mind is different, but not necessarily what I write, but definitely how I write it. I always wear earphones. I think before children, I didn't have to cover my ears, and now I do. It's for the past 18 years. Like, the minute I sit down to write, the earphones go on.
We have about 10 minutes left for our audience Q&A, so keep your questions coming. Okay, this is from Marie, who writes, in the book, you talk about big historic events like the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. Will your next book reflect or be influenced by all the things that are happening in 2020, as this will be a year that no one will forget as well? Great question.
Oh my goodness.
Oh boy.
You know, I think the minute this year is over, I am going to just step outside of it for a long while. I mean, never say never. I was on Twitter, and my friend Jason Reynolds posted, this kid had done a painting. I don't know if you saw that. And he had drawn a volcano, and he had drawn a tornado. And he's like, and the tornado is going to go inside. The volcano is going to be a volcano-nado. And he's like, you know, that's God talking about 2020. It's like, what more can happen? You know, it's like this volcano-nado will be here. I don't plan to. I probably plan to go back to the good old days of like Reagan and Bush or something. Like, what? Like, you start looking at it, and you're like, it wasn't as bad as we thought it was compared to this. I think I'm going to step way outside of this moment for a while, you know, all willing that we get through it.
Do you feel like this moment, and now I'll get back to audience Q&A, but do you feel like this moment has sort of maybe affected your creativity either positively or negatively? Like, how are you able to still create during this time?
You know, I had stopped running. I run 2 miles every day, and I can't not do it. like I really feel like I have to get out, and I have to just kind of breathe and feel something inside my body that's not this, and forget. And as I was saying earlier, that's where Black Frasier comes in. I like, put my ear pods, listen to your podcast. Yesterday I was listening to T.R.E. Jones's short story that's on Audible. Like I get those earphones on and I take off. And before I could write for hours and just sit there and not be interrupted, and let the world kind of go by me. But that is something that has changed. I really disconnect from social media in a much more intentional way. Like I'll go on and be on it for like 10 minutes or 15, but then I'm gone. I let my partner tell me the news at in very small increments because it's overwhelming. So there's a lot more self-care going on, and which I deeply encourage, because it's nonstop. It's like a floodgate. You turn it on and it just keeps coming. And so for me, writing becomes the escape, the way I can go to some place and, as I said earlier, create that world that I want to exist in for a while. So it will not be 2020.
Yeah. Okay. This is from Zing Tings. Great. Love that. Zing Tings writes, can you give us a sense of how you find out your start, or how you find out start your stories? Hold on. I'm going to try and interpret this. Can you give us a sense of how you start out your stories? I think. Any tips on writing short stories as well? Thank you so much.
I don't write a lot of stories, but short stories anymore. But my stories are character driven. So they start with a voice in my head, and it's usually me trying to figure out who that character is, what they want, and how are they going to get it. And that's the whole journey of the narrative. A lot of my books are based on the hero's journey. It's like there's some way in which they are taken outside of their original world, the world that they've always known, because something happens to them. In the case of Iris, she gets pregnant, right? In the case of Sadie, her daughter gets pregnant. In the case of Aubrey, he's about to become a father. In the case of Po Boy, he's become a grandfather. In the case of Melody, she's having this coming of age and having to deal with, her mother who's back in her life in this way. So I think that is the question. I think that the way to go in is just let your character speak. And I always say, when you start writing, say, no one is ever going to see this. And if no one is ever going to see it, what is it you would write? And then, and that's this writing you could tear up and get rid of if it feels uncomfortable to you or too vulnerable. But just start with that character. Start with what matters to you and see where it takes you.
Great advice. So Vivian writes, are you in the middle of writing a book right now?
Right now, I am actually working on the screenplay for Red at the Bone. So I'm getting through it. I think I'm almost on the other side of it. I just finished a book called Before the Ever After that came out on September 2nd. I'm working on a nonfiction book, and I finished 2 picture books, and I'm working on another TV series based on my book Behind You.
Jacqueline, I am tired just listening to that. Oh my gosh. But I'm so excited that you're going to turn Red at the Bone into a movie, because I was reading this. I was like, oh, it's so, like, your economy of language just made it so cinematic. So I'm so excited to hear that. Okay. So this question is from Valerie. You said you write to ask questions. What are some of the questions you wanted to ask in Red at the Bone? Ooh, that's great, Val. I love that.
I wanted to ask about the Black wealth. What happened? I wanted to ask about motherhood. What are the choices we make? I wanted to ask about what it means to be a teenage boy whose life changes suddenly. And that's part of the reason I read the part with Slip Rock, because that's that point where Aubrey is at a crossroads, right? Slip Rock is like, I got you. If you're good, you could come, sling crack with me. And Aubrey's like, he has his hands in his pockets and they're empty, and there's actual lint in his pockets that he's feeling, which makes him even sadder. And And still, but he kind of fists his hands into his pockets, and he's like, I'm good, I'm trying, but at the same time, he's like, I can make this choice and make some money and get Iris and my baby out of here. So what does it mean to be a teenage dad? Like, what does that look like? And what does it look like when economic classes collide? So those were just some of the many questions I was asking.
Okay, last call for audience Q&A. Okay, I'm Sanai. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize if I'm not. Sanai writes, "Hi, Miss Jacqueline Woodson. I am Sanai Rasheed and loved, all caps, loved Red at the Bone. I am a Black teenage girl who also wants to become a writer and wish to ask, how do you paint your characters and scenes so vividly? And is there any advice you have for aspiring Black writers like myself? I also know your daughter, Toshi. She was my BSU leader."
Lisa Nye. That's right. You are a writer. You're legendary already for being a writer. So yes, Toshi was your BSU
so
leader. Thanks for that question. And you did pronounce it right. You learn to write by reading, right? And I know you're a reader already. And one thing, when I was your age, I was reading a lot of Raymond Carver because he was one of the few minimalists I knew. And also, I would read the same books again and again. If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde, which came a little bit later. But I would read these books and try to study how the writers did it. And also, I think a writer's group is a really good thing to have. Just 2 or 3 people who you really trust, not the people who are going to be like, that sucks, but the people who are like, I want to hear more. When I write stuff, the first time around, I ask people to tell me only what they love about it. That's all I want to hear, is everything you love about it. I don't want to hear any questions. I don't want to hear any criticisms. I just want to hear all that you love. And then eventually, when the writing feels with that, I go back and I just write a lot more. And then eventually I get to the point where I say, ask me 3 questions. But I'm very curated about feedback and how I take it in, because it is so fragile. But I would say, decide what you want to write. Are you writing short stories? Are you writing poetry? Are you working on a novel? And don't think, with a novel, don't think I have to write 200 pages. I mean, my novels tend to be shorter. Just think that it has to have a beginning, middle, and end. And again, going back to what I said earlier, what does your character want and how are they going to get it? Look up stuff about the hero's journey. That's a good way to think about your character. And again, take writing classes. Take all the writing classes you can possibly take, and try to take writing classes where there are other Black people in those classes, so you don't have to explain. I think that's one of the things that makes it really hard, especially for Black and brown kids, is when someone who hasn't had that experience says, well, that doesn't sound like anything I understand. And of course, I am the majority, so it must be wrong. So be very clear about who the circles you're sharing your writing in, because that really does matter. Get those allies and get those people in there writing with you.
It's so great that we're ending the Q&A with that question. That's so cute. Thank you so much for everyone who wrote in such amazing questions. Don't forget, if you have not purchased your copy of Red at the Bone, you can get it now. It's available everywhere at all the Barnes and Nobles. It's a September pick. Ooh, that was a great song. Jacqueline, thank you. Jacqueline, thank you so much for allowing me to have the opportunity to sit down and chat with you. This has been so fun. I've been geeking out the whole time. I'm sure you can tell. And I know you're writing 1 million books right now, so I can't wait to buy all of them and read all of them.
Oh man, I can't wait to drop this brown off at your house. And thank you. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're busy with that fabulous podcast and all the many other things you're doing. And thank Mr. British Bake Off for me
I
And
will.
I'm gonna see you in the hood. And thank you, Barnes and Noble. Thanks for choosing Red at the Bone. Thanks for your